The HOA president looked me dead in the eye and said, "Your grandfather's pond is stealing water from my community," then slapped me with a $50,000 lien to destroy the place where I scattered my wife's ashes. So, I stopped the theft and let her $1 million neighborhood wash away. At this moment, I'm positioned in what was once Cordelia Blackstone's impeccably groomed front lawn, observing her slog through chest-high floodwaters in a $2,000 designer outfit, yelling at the Channel 9 news crew as her white Tesla Model S floats by her mailbox like the priciest rubber duck in existence. The odor assaults you like a punch, that heavy blend of gasoline, decaying turf, and untreated waste that emerges when the forces of nature reclaim territory from presumptuous folks who believed they controlled it. Notice that drenched crimson document she's gripping? That's the ultimate demand she lodged against my residence 48 hours back. $50,000 payable right away or forfeit the land my kin has held since 1962, all due to my refusal to empty the innate, spring-fed basin that's been averting precisely this deluge for 6 decades. It seems when you tamper with a mourning widower's hallowed spot out of petty rivalry, the laws of nature couldn't care less about your HOA rules. What would you do if some authority-obsessed busybody attempted to seize your ancestral territory and profane your partner's eternal resting site over water your grandpa rightfully possessed, long before she entered the world? Share in the comments your location while viewing. I bet your HOA tales will make this seem like mere preparation. I'm Marcus Rodriguez, though folks know me as Tank, a moniker from my quarter-century crafting flood mitigation setups for the Army Corps of Engineers. At 52, I thought I'd encountered every form of administrative combat imaginable. Apparently, I hadn't crossed paths with Cordelia Blackstone until now. A couple of years back, following Sarah's defeat to cancer, I took over my grandfather's 3-acre spread in Pine Ridge Estates, Colorado. The spot had belonged to our family since 1962, when this area was nothing but rugged highlands and isolated cabins. Grandpa Miguel constructed it all manually, the lodge, the shed, and crucially, the spring-nourished pond where Sarah and I tossed wildflowers each year we celebrated, and where I ultimately dispersed her remains on a serene autumn dawn that still chokes me up. The pond wasn't merely a pretty garden feature. Grandpa grasped hydrology superior to many professionals I've collaborated with. He directed the organic spring into a holding mechanism that safeguarded the whole valley beneath from inundation. The soft murmur of liquid cascading over manually piled slate always evoked Sarah's tone for me. Gentle yet persistent, unforgettable. The aroma of damp rock and alpine fir turned this location into a refuge. That haven was breached the day Cordelia Blackstone's white Tesla rolled up my pebble drive like a polar hunter pursuing game. Envision a lady pieced together in a boardroom lab, with silver blonde locks trimmed into a sharp executive cut, a slate-gray professional ensemble pricier than my yearly tax bill, and a grin that shouts, "I devour startups before lunch." She clacked over my stones in heels utterly unsuited for hilly ground, gripping a hide binder as if it held national intelligence. The suffocating wave of jasmine scent heralding her presence could have sterilized a storage facility. Imagine lavish burial blooms blended with heavy-duty cleaner. Mr. Rodriguez. She offered a palm that resembled clasping a dummy's arm. "Cordelia Blackstone, president of Pine Ridge Estates HOA. We face a grave issue with your illicit water stockpiling." I tightened my rough digits around my coffee cup, sensing the worn indent from my marriage band. "Pardon?" She flipped open that binder with the snap of a snare. "This basin breaches hydration oversight rules enacted half a year ago during your absence." The manner she uttered absence as if Sarah's passing was a trivial bother made my jaw clench. "My grandfather established this pond in 1962, I replied, maintaining my technical composure. 60 years prior to your guidelines." Regardless, she thrust down documents with dramatic flourish. "All current aquatic elements must align with present neighborhood norms. You have 1 month to remove this setup." Here's where her scheme turned truly cunning. While I'd been organizing Sarah's remembrance, Cordelia's spouse, Bradley, a municipal official resembling a factory-produced Politico, had pushed through fresh HOA water policies in a rushed meeting without any local feedback. All other long-standing features received legacy exemptions, every last one but mine. The forms exposed the truth. Cordelia wasn't a fretful local concerned with visual harmony. She was a hunter. Her property firm focused on acquiring troubled estates from beleaguered owners, then reselling to builders. My trio of acres with inherent water privileges and high ground placement were the prime asset that would enable her multi-million luxury apartment venture. As twilight hues extended over Sarah's pond, I gazed at the dusk tinting the waves in amber and scarlet, hues that once shimmered in her tresses. I could almost detect her words piercing the hill quiet. "Tank, darling, you've never retreated from a battle when vulnerable folks required defense." She was spot on. I'd devoted 25 years outsmarting officials who viewed engineering as optional. Time to show these types that water invariably seeks the easiest route. And currently, that route pointed directly at their plots. 72 hours post Cordelia's deadline, she reappeared with reinforcements that resembled novice fraudsters. Her spotless Tesla trailed a rundown Honda Civic patched with tape and wishful thinking. Emerging was a lanky youth in a poorly sized polo, clutching a notepad as if it bore atomic secrets. "Mr. Rodriguez, this is Derek Blackstone, our licensed hydration consumption examiner," Cordelia proclaimed, displaying that knife-edge smirk. The lad appeared no more than 25, with anxious gazes and sparse beard growth implying hormones were still undecided. I folded my arms, already sniffing something fouler than a summer feedlot. "Licensed by whom precisely?" "The Colorado Hydration Oversight Agency," Derek piped up, mishandling plastic credentials that seemed newer than convenience store fish. I'd partnered with authentic state water auditors from the peaks to the bayous. They arrive in official rides with proper tags, tote gear costlier than Derek's whole vehicle, and certainly don't share holiday meals with the accuser. This boy's accreditation waived more warnings than a communist march. "Do you object if I phone the agency to confirm that ID?" I inquired, drawing my device with the easy assurance of one who'd exposed lying officials since Derek was in training pants. His complexion paled quicker than liquid through a cracked barrier. "That's really unnecessary. This is merely initial." What ensued was an hour of pure hilarity. Derek snapped shots of my pond from all possible views as if cataloging a felony site, jotted notes that would shame a preschooler, and gauged liquid depth with what was clearly a hardware store measuring rod. The reek of low-cost synthetic hide from his case clashed with pure hill breeze like discount aftershave at a mortuary. My grandfather's wisdom resounded in my thoughts. "Son, when slick speakers arrive with formal docs to pilfer your water, you inspect those docs double and believe them zero." The elder had endured hard times by detecting swindlers from afar. "Your expert opinion?" Cordelia queried with the eager hunger of a predator sensing injury. "Undoubtedly improper liquid holding," Derek proclaimed with the clout of a plaza security guard, along with possible insect reproduction breaches and AR, he peered at his messy scrawl. "Overabundant liquid buildup exceeding local guidelines." That's when Cordelia deployed her initial genuine tactic, presenting a breach alert marked in vivid scarlet. $5,000 sanction for unsanctioned water pilfering from shared assets. Water pilfering! I burst into genuine laughter. "From a fountain that's been flowing here since your great-grandma was mastering arithmetic. Personal land claims can't override group well-being," she intoned, as if quoting from the HOA Scripture Chapter 12. The true blow landed the following dawn when my neighbor Frank ambled over, appearing as if he'd ingested a cactus. He passed me the Pine Ridge Bulletin with trembling grip, indicating page 3, where a title turned my meal to wood chips. "Area dweller stockpiles water as locals endure dry spells." The smear article depicted me as an egotistical recluse, robbing vital fluid from diligent households. Unnamed worried citizens fretted over still pools fostering dangers and my obstinate rejection of fair neighborhood rules. They'd even captured my pristine spring basin from the filthiest perspective, rendering it akin to a disease hotbed. Perusing that reputation, demolition felt like a stomach strike from brass-clad fists laced with irritants. Sarah would have been devastated witnessing our holy site smeared by individuals who'd mistake pure water for something biting their cosmetically altered rears. But Cordelia had committed a strategic blunder that would earn her a tribunal in my service era. She'd initiated conflict against someone who'd spent 25 years dodging officials with doctorates in inventive bureaucracy. That afternoon, I headed to the district courthouse. a stone edifice to judicial battles reeking of generations of shattered hopes and musty fairness. My armed forces preparation had instilled that when leaders brandish policies like arms, you scrutinize the rounds before they demolish your existence. 3 hours of archival excavation unearthed riches beyond precious metal. My grandfather's initial title encompassed eternal spring hydration entitlements from 1962, not merely top water, full ore, and fountain privileges that antedated their valued HOA by 30 years. Each trickle passing through my basin was lawfully, unalterably, forever mine. I contacted Jake Thornfield, my former Corps comrade who'd swapped his tech hard hat for a jurisprudence credential in ecological combat. In our overseas stint, Jake had extracted me from a fallen watering duct. Now he'd repay by extricating me from this statutory pit. "Tank, you magnificent bastard!" Jake's tone brimmed with the glee of an attorney eyeing a simple victory. "Eternal hydration entitlements are statutory weakness. They can't lay a finger on you." But Jake's further probe uncovered something that chilled my veins more than a peak storm. Bradley Blackstone controlled Mountain Vista Builders, LLC, a front entity that had been methodically absorbing veteran locals after overwhelming them with fabricated infractions and burdensome penalties. My basin wasn't arbitrary torment. It was the tactical linchpin governing hydration entry for their whole multi-million construction plot. 14 days on, Cordelia ramped up to total mental assault. The Pine Ridge Civic Hub hummed with tense vibes as locals streamed into the routine HOA assembly. The scent of scorched brew and unease lingered like a poisonous fog. I entered to discover the space crammed with unfamiliar visages. Youthful execs in pricey casual gear who'd likely relocated recently and couldn't distinguish a genuine spring from a backyard dip. Cordelia had obviously prepared, loading the group with novices who'd accept any narrative she served. "Everyone," Cordelia commenced, her words oozing fabricated worry. "We confront a major wellness emergency." She pressed a button, and the display wall showed what resembled a terror flick ad. My lovely spring basin had been edited into a slimy, verdant horror that might serve as an undead outbreak backdrop. "These pictures record hazardous microbial proliferation and bug hatching areas," she declared amid shocked inhalations. "Autonomous analysis verifies heightened concentrations of damaging microbes that endanger our kids' security." Autonomous analysis, my foot. I'd been sampling that fluid personally for 2 years with tools that dwarfed Derek's rod to insignificance. The basin was purer than urban faucets, but attempt clarifying that to folks who'd already pegged you as the area antagonist. Mrs. Henderson from the lane lifted a quivering palm. "But hasn't that basin existed since antiquity doesn't shield from modern wellness criteria?" Cordelia sliced her off with exacting sharpness. "We bear a duty to shield our group's health." The panel approved unanimously to hike my penalty to $15,000 plus $500 daily until adherence. But the genuine boot to the mouth arrived next. Intrusion alerts that barred me legally from reaching my own basin for protection motives. Trekking home amid the fresh hill breeze, I sensed like I'd been robbed by types donning attire and phony grins. The noise of my footwear grinding pebbles synced with my gnashing molars. But here's the deal with serving as a battle technician. You master anticipating several steps beyond those aiming to ruin your plans. That evening, I set up a dozen wilderness cams along my land edges, each concealed with the stealth expertise that preserved my life in enemy zones. In 2 days, those cams justified their cost in solid proof. The initial windfall hit at 2:17 a.m. on a dark Thursday. Derek Blackstone, still in that absurd polo, sneaked onto my grounds, toting a pail that splashed per stride. I observed him pour what appeared as deceased fish into my spotless basin, then snap images of the outcome with pro-illumination gear. The punk was fabricating his own proof. But the follow-up footage sent my vitals soaring to red. At 3:45 a.m. that night, Bradley Blackstone himself lurked near my landlines with 2 helmeted guys, gesturing at marking posts and debating base specs and hydration access rights. They weren't merely bothering me. They were plotting construction on terrain they hadn't acquired. The subsequent morning, I summoned a crisis gathering of what I'd begun considering the founding dwellers, people present before Cordelia transformed our serene hill enclave into her private property domain. Frank from adjacent brought his spouse, Ruth. The Hendersons trudged over, seeming anxious. Even aged Pete Morrison, who rarely exited his hut save for provisions, limped from the crest. "They're targeting everyone," I informed them, laying out the cam prints on my dining surface like battle maps. "This exceeds my basin. It's about displacing us for building." Ruth Henderson's gaze expanded as she examined a shot of Derek polluting my fluid. "That's unlawful, right? Deception, intrusion, proof alteration, plotting. I listed offenses on my digits, plus any national violations tied to tampering with guarded hydration origins." That's when Pete chimed in with his raspy timbre. "You know, Tank, my place has drawn odd notice recently, too. Infractions I've never encountered. Gripes about my hens as farming breaches in a housing district." Frank dipped his head solemnly. "Ruth and I were ticketed for our produce patch as an unauthorized terrain change, $2,500 charge." The scheme was now transparent. Cordelia and her mate were methodically aiming at all veteran dwellers with invented breaches, attempting to expel us so they could pounce with bargain bids and convert our lands into upscale apartments. We established what I named the Pine Ridge Legacy Group that day, a formal body with Frank as chair, Ruth as recorder, and me as heritage safeguard lead. In my military tenure, I discovered that officials honor groups with formal titles, particularly when those groups begin submitting their own forms. But the true insight emerged when I matched land logs with HOA breach trends. Each veteran dweller had gotten notices in the last 18 months. Everyone. Conversely, Cordelia's fresh arrivals, with their artificially vibrant yards and rule-breaking spas, passed unscathed without a peep. The rigging was evident, and now I possessed the substantiation. 3 weeks into our legacy group's life, Cordelia unleashed the judicial bomb. Jake rang me at sunrise, his tone taut with the restrained fury attorneys employ when a boundary's been violated gravely. "Tank, they've initiated a suit alleging your basin poses a communal wellness risk," he stated. "But that's not the nadir. They secured a provisional injunction barring you from any basin upkeep while the matter hangs." I perched on my veranda viewing the early fog lift from Sarah's basin, feeling like a locomotive had slammed my midsection. How in blazes did they pull that? Corrupted district wellness auditor called Willis McGrath. His document asserts your fluid showed positive for E. coli, giardia, and roughly half a dozen other toxins that had fell a steed. Jake's words seeped revulsion. Issue is, McGrath's accepted funds from Mountain Vista Builders for 8 months. I've secured the financial trails. The graph plunged deeper than a mine tunnel. McGrath had approved Cordelia's phony wellness doc without stepping foot on my grounds, then submitted it to the judiciary as urgent proof demanding swift response. My penalty had escalated to $30,000 with warnings of land lien and seizure if I didn't obey in 10 days. But here's where my armed forces tech expertise shone like treasure. In my core period, I'd teamed with sufficient ecology experts to recognize that authentic fluid pollution doesn't manifest suddenly in a spring-sourced setup clean for 6 decades. Thus, I invoked a debt from Dr. Maria Santos at the State University, who was indebted for my aid in planning her hydration purification lab. Dr. Santos showed up the next dawn with apparatus that rendered McGrath's notepad childish. Top-tier fluid analysis tools, government-grade specimen holders, and a doctorate in ecological studies that could humble crooked auditors to tears. Her findings exposed McGrath's dock as the deceitful trash it was. My basin fluid proved purer than the city's supply in Colorado Springs. Untouched alpine spring liquid with mineral makeup that would bring tears to premium bottlers' eyes. Tank. "This is some of the purest natural water I've seen in 20 years, Dr. Santos told me, sealing sample vials with scientific precision. Whoever filed that contamination report either can't read testing equipment or deliberately falsified government documents." While Dr. Santos worked her scientific magic, I spent my evenings conducting reconnaissance that would have made my old recon unit proud. Armed with night vision equipment and the patience of someone who'd spent months watching enemy positions, I documented every HOA board member's property violations they'd been ignoring. Cordelia's own backyard was a buffet of code violations. Unpermitted deck addition, illegal gray water system, landscape lighting that violated dark sky ordinances, and a hot tub installed without proper electrical permits. Her husband Bradley's violations were even juicier. Unpermitted home office addition, illegal driveway expansion, and a workshop that violated setback requirements by 12 FT. But the real smoking gun came from tracking their enforcement patterns, using spreadsheets that would have made Army logistics proud. I mapped every violation notice issued in the past 2 years. The pattern was more obvious than a neon sign in a coal mine. 100% of longtime residents cited. 0% of newcomers who supported Cordelia's regime. That's when Jake hit them with legal artillery that would have made Sherman's march to the SIA look like a gentle stroll. He filed counter lawsuits for harassment, defamation, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. But the real haymaker was requesting a full forensic audit of HOA finances and voting procedures. Here's something every homeowner should understand, Jake explained during our strategy session, his lawyer brain shifting into teaching mode. HOAs have to follow their own bylaws religiously, and most of them violate their own rules constantly. When they start selectively enforcing regulations based on personal grudges or financial gain, that's conspiracy and civil rights violation, federal crimes with serious jail time attached. Our Heritage Committee had grown from 4 worried neighbors to 15 families, plus Dr. Morrison from the university and Sam Patterson, a retired police chief who'd started investigating Bradley's business dealings. Sam's connections in law enforcement were already turning up interesting connections between Mountain Vista Development and several city council members who'd voted on convenient zoning changes. But Cordelia wasn't finished. The morning after Jake filed our countersuits, I woke up to find my mailbox stuffed with anonymous letters calling me everything from unpatriotic water thief to dangerous veteran who needs psychiatric help. Someone had also spray-painted water hoarder across my workshop door in red letters that looked like dried blood. My dog Rex, a German shepherd who'd been my constant companion since Sarah's death, started acting nervous around certain neighbors, his ears perking up and hackles rising whenever Cordelia's supporters walked past. Animals know predators better than humans do, and Rex was sending me clear signals that danger was escalating. The anonymous harassment told me Cordelia was getting desperate, which meant she was about to make bigger mistakes. Desperate people take bigger risks, and bigger risks leave bigger evidence trails. I just had to be patient and let her dig her own grave deep enough to bury her schemes permanently. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source, a dusty filing cabinet in the courthouse basement that looked like it hadn't been opened since the Carter administration. I was hunting for additional water rights documentation when my fingers brushed against a folder marked Pine Ridge Estates, Original Corporate Charter, 1987. What I found inside changed everything. The original HOA charter, signed by the community's founding members, required unanimous consent for any water-related regulations. Not majority vote, not simple quorum, unanimous. Every single property owner had to agree before the HOA could touch anyone's water rights. Cordelia's new regulations had passed with only 60% approval, legally invalid under the community's own founding documents. But the real bombshell was buried in Section 12C of the Charter. My grandfather's property was specifically designated as the community's primary water source and natural flood management system. The original developers had written protection for my pond directly into the HOA's legal foundation. Recognizing its critical role in preventing downstream flooding, I sat in that musty basement, surrounded by the smell of old paper and forgotten bureaucracy, holding documents that proved Cordelia hadn't just violated HOA bylaws. She'd attacked the very infrastructure that kept her own basement dry. Jake's voice cracked with excitement when I called him. "Tank, this is legal dynamite. Your pond isn't just protected, it's officially designated as community infrastructure. Trying to force you to drain it is like demanding you demolish the fire station." The deeper conspiracy unraveled like a cheap sweater. Jake's investigation revealed that the HOA had been operating without proper corporate registration for 2 years. Bradley had let their state filing lapse while funneling association fees into his development company's accounts. Every fine issued during this period was legally void, phantom penalties with zero enforcement power. But the truly sickening discovery came when Jake traced Mountain Vista Development's financial records. Bradley's shell company already had preliminary development permits for a luxury condo complex called Spring Ridge Estates. The architectural plans showed a central water feature fed by, you guessed it, my grandfather's spring. They weren't just trying to steal my land. They planned to drain my pond, destroy the natural flood control system, and use my water as the centerpiece for their million-dollar development. The same spring water they'd labeled a public health hazard would become a luxury amenity for wealthy newcomers. Here's the thing about water table dynamics that most people don't understand. I told Jake, my engineering brain clicking into gear. Remove that pond, and half the basement in Pine Ridge flood every spring thaw. Basic hydrology they should have learned in high school. Water always seeks the lowest level, and without natural retention, it takes the path of least resistance straight through foundation walls. The environmental impact study buried in Mountain Vista's permit application confirmed my worst fears. Their hydrologist had noted potential seasonal flooding issues, but recommended solving them with expensive storm drain systems and basement waterproofing costs that would be passed on to existing homeowners through special assessments. They'd manufactured a crisis to steal my pond, then planned to charge my neighbors thousands to fix the flooding problems they'd created. The moral clarity hit me like a mountain avalanche. This wasn't just about my property anymore. It was about protecting every family in Pine Ridge from a predatory scheme designed to bankrupt longtime residents and transform our quiet mountain community into a playground for the wealthy. My pond wasn't hoarding water from the community. It was protecting the community from floods, foundation damage, and financial ruin. The real criminals were sitting in the HOA boardroom wearing expensive suits and fake smiles while planning to destroy the natural systems that kept our neighborhood safe. As I walked home through the evening shadows, watching the sunset paint Sarah's pond in shades of gold and crimson, I felt her presence stronger than I had since her funeral. She'd always believed in fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Time to show Cordelia and Bradley what happened when they declared war on someone with nothing left to lose and everything worth protecting. The war room convened in my kitchen on a crisp October morning that smelled like coffee, determination, and impending justice. My team assembled around the old oak table Sarah had inherited from her grandmother. 5 people who'd become my legal and tactical strike force. Jake Thornfield sat across from me, his environmental law expertise sharp as a combat knife. Dr. Evelyn Morrison, the retired geology professor who tested my water, spread topographical maps across the table with the precision of a battlefield strategist. Sam Bulldog Patterson, our retired police chief, brought 3 decades of experience hunting white-collar criminals who thought badges were just shiny decorations. Maria Santos, the investigative journalist whose water rights series had won state awards, recorded everything with the hungry efficiency of someone who smelled a Pulitzer Prize. And then there was me, a pissed-off widower with 25 years of military engineering and a burning desire to watch corrupt bureaucrats face consequences for their actions. We hit them on 3 fronts simultaneously. I announced spreading Jake's legal documents like artillery targeting maps, legal warfare, technical expertise, and public exposure. They won't know which direction the attack is coming from. Our legal strategy was surgical precision wrapped in bureaucratic explosives. Jake had filed an emergency injunction to stop all HOA enforcement while the charter violation investigation proceeded. His lawsuit demanded full financial auditing of every HOA transaction since Bradley's shell company started operating. We'd also requested federal intervention under environmental protection laws since my pond qualified as protected wetlands under the Clean Water Act. Property law is like chess, Jake explained, channeling the patient teaching voice he'd used during our Army days. You establish your position with ironclad documentation. Control the center with legal precedent. Then checkmate with evidence they can't deny. Tank's perpetual water rights are our queen. Untouchable and able to move in any direction we need. Dr. Morrison's environmental impact study would prove that my pond prevented ecological disaster. Her comprehensive analysis documented how the natural spring system managed storm runoff, prevented erosion, maintained groundwater levels, and supported wildlife habitat that had existed since before European settlement. Destroying it would violate multiple federal environmental protection statutes. Environmental science doesn't lie, she said, adjusting wire-rimmed glasses over eyes that had seen 40 years of corporate environmental destruction. Remove this retention system and you're looking at annual flood damage, foundation failures, well contamination, and habitat destruction. Any hydrologist worth their degree would call Bradley's development plan ecological vandalism. Meanwhile, Sam's police investigation was uncovering corruption that reached into City Hall itself. His contacts in law enforcement had traced cash payments from Mountain Vista Development to 3 city council members who'd voted on zoning changes that benefited Bradley's projects. The FBI's white-collar crime unit was already sniffing around, drawn by the smell of conspiracy and mail fraud. Here's something civilians don't understand about investigating corruption. Sam growled in his cop voice that had intimidated criminals for 3 decades. Follow the money, document everything, and let the bad guys hang themselves with their own greed. These people always get sloppy when they think they're untouchable. But our secret weapon was something I discovered during my courthouse archaeology expedition. The original Army Corps of Engineers survey from 1981, a survey I'd worked on as a young lieutenant fresh out of engineering school, classified my pond as part of the federal flood control system for the entire Arkansas River watershed. Any interference with federally designated flood control infrastructure was a federal crime carrying serious prison time. Cordelia and Bradley hadn't just violated HOA bylaws, they'd attacked critical infrastructure that protected thousands of downstream properties. Maria's investigative journalism would expose the whole conspiracy to public scrutiny. Her series on water rights corruption was already attracting attention from regional newspapers and environmental groups. She'd also started building a social media campaign called Ashard's Save Pine Ridge Pond that was gaining support from water conservation activists across Colorado. Public opinion warfare is about storytelling, Maria explained, her journalist instincts sharp as a scalpel. David versus Goliath sells newspapers, but David versus Goliath with environmental protection and veterans' rights angles, that's front-page gold. Our tactical timeline stretched across the next 6 weeks. Legal paperwork would hit the courts like coordinated artillery strikes. Environmental documentation would bury their bogus health claims under mountains of scientific evidence. Criminal investigations would trace every dollar they'd stolen and every law they'd broken. But the real beauty of our strategy was its elegance. We weren't just defending my property. We were protecting the entire community from predators who'd infiltrated our local government like a cancer. Every piece of evidence we gathered would expose another layer of corruption, another victim, another crime. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the crisp mountain air flowing through my kitchen windows as we finalized our battle plan. Outside, Sarah's pond reflected the morning sun like a mirror, its gentle sounds reminding me why this fight mattered. They picked the wrong veteran to mess with, I told my team, feeling the familiar calm that came before decisive action. Time to show these bureaucratic bullies what happens when they declare war on someone who actually knows how to fight. Cordelia's desperation kicked into overdrive the moment our legal papers hit the courthouse. Within 48 hours, she'd escalated from petty harassment to full-scale psychological warfare that would have impressed a Soviet interrogator. The $50,000 lien notice arrived via certified mail on a Tuesday morning that started peaceful and went straight to hell. The blood-red stamp screamed immediate property forfeit with the kind of bureaucratic violence that makes your stomach drop into your boots. They were demanding payment within 72 hours, or they'd begin foreclosure proceedings on land my family had owned since Eisenhower was president. But Cordelia wasn't finished flexing her manufactured authority. That afternoon, 2 men in black security uniforms showed up at my property line carrying clipboards and attitude problems. Their company logo read, Apex Property Protection, the kind of rental cops who get hired when actual law enforcement won't touch your bogus complaints. Sir, we're here to monitor this property for compliance violations, announced the larger one, whose neck was thicker than most people's waists. Any interference with our surveillance activities will be reported to local authorities. They set up folding chairs 20 ft from my driveway and proceeded to document my every move like I was planning terrorist attacks instead of drinking coffee on my own porch. The psychological pressure was obvious. Make me feel like a criminal in my own home, create enough stress to force a mistake or breakdown. Meanwhile, Bradley was pulling strings in City Hall with the desperation of a puppet master watching his marionettes catch fire. An emergency water conservation ordinance appeared on the city council agenda, specifically targeting private water retention that exceeds municipal guidelines. The timing was about as subtle as a brick through a window. My pond supposedly violated regulations that wouldn't exist until they voted them into existence. But their most vicious attack came through whispers and innuendo designed to destroy my reputation in a community where your word was your bond. Anonymous flyers appeared in mailboxes throughout Pine Ridge, warning neighbors about the unstable veteran with PTSD who was hoarding water while making violent threats against community leaders. The psychological warfare playbook was right out of military intelligence training. Isolate the target, destroy their support network, create enough social pressure to force capitulation. Someone had done their homework on breaking people's will to fight. Rex started reacting to the surveillance with the kind of protective instincts that had kept us both alive in hostile territory. His hackles would rise whenever those security goons got too close, and he'd position himself between me and any strangers who approached the property. Animals know predators better than humans do, and Rex was sending clear signals that these people meant serious harm. The utility harassment began the next week when my electricity got accidentally shut off for routine maintenance that somehow lasted 3 days. The cable internet followed. Then my landline phone developed mysterious service interruptions that the phone company couldn't seem to locate or fix. Death by 1,000 cuts designed to make daily life so miserable I'd surrender just to make it stop. But here's where they underestimated someone who'd survived military bureaucracy and combat deployments. I'd been documenting everything with the obsessive precision of someone who understood that evidence wins wars. Trail cameras captured the security guards trespassing on my property. Digital recordings preserved every threatening phone call. Screenshots saved every anonymous social media attack. Meanwhile, my team was working with surgical precision to dismantle their operation from the inside. Jake's legal motions had frozen all HOA enforcement activities pending investigation. Dr. Morrison's environmental report was gaining support from university colleagues across 3 states. Sam's criminal investigation had attracted federal attention when bank records showed Mountain Vista Development receiving suspicious cash deposits from offshore accounts. Thorough breakthrough came when Maria's journalism investigation uncovered Bradley's previous operations in Wyoming and Utah. Turns out this wasn't his first rodeo. He'd been running the same development scam in mountain communities for nearly a decade, always targeting longtime residents with water rights or valuable land positions. This is their standard playbook, Maria explained during one of our evening strategy sessions. Move into a community, get someone elected to local government, manufacture regulatory crises to force property sales, then flip the land to developers for massive profits. They've probably stolen millions of dollars worth of property from families who didn't know how to fight back. But I wasn't some scared retiree who'd roll over for bureaucratic bullies. Every pressure tactic they used just strengthened my resolve to expose their corruption and protect other families from the same predatory schemes. As October shadows lengthened across Sarah's pond, I prepared for the final phase of our counterattack. They'd shown their hand, revealed their desperation, and made enough mistakes to bury them in their own corruption. Time to show these parasites what happened when they picked a fight with someone who'd learned warfare from people who wrote the manual. The final provocation came on a gray November morning that tasted like winter and smelled like desperation. I was drinking coffee on my porch when Sheriff's Deputy Martinez pulled up my driveway, followed by Cordelia's Tesla and 3 industrial pump trucks that rumbled like mechanical dinosaurs. Deputy Martinez looked uncomfortable as hell, clutching court papers with the reluctance of someone forced to enforce orders he didn't believe in. "Mr. Rodriguez, I've got an emergency health order for immediate pond drainage. Claims of imminent public safety threat requiring immediate remediation." Behind him, Cordelia practically vibrated with vindictive satisfaction, flanked by pump truck operators who clearly got paid by the gallon to destroy things. She'd found a corrupt judge, probably one of Bradley's golf buddies, willing to sign an emergency order based on fabricated evidence and manufactured urgency. Emergency. I kept my voice level despite the rage building in my chest like steam in a pressure cooker. Based on what evidence says here, bacterial contamination poses immediate threat to groundwater and community health. Martinez read reluctantly. Order requires immediate compliance with court supervision. The pump trucks were already positioning themselves like siege engines, preparing to drain the life from my grandfather's legacy. Their diesel engines belched black smoke that mixed with the clean mountain air like a middle finger to everything sacred and pure. The operators wore hazmat suits as if my crystal-clear spring water was radioactive waste instead of the purest natural water in 3 counties. Then you have the right to appeal this order, Martinez added quietly. But you're legally required to remain 100 FT from drainage operations for safety reasons. Safety right. They were keeping me far enough away that I couldn't interfere with their destruction or document their evidence tampering. Classic psychological warfare forced me to watch helplessly while they destroyed everything I'd fought to protect. But here's the thing about combat engineers. We're trained to think 3 moves ahead of people trying to blow up our objectives. While Cordelia celebrated her temporary victory, I was calculating water displacement rates, flood patterns, and the exact timing needed for maximum educational impact. That evening, I made the phone call that would change everything. Army Corps of Engineers, Regional Office, Major Patricia Hayes speaking. Major, this is Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, retired. I need to report unauthorized interference with federally designated flood control infrastructure. What followed was a conversation that would have made Cordelia wet herself if she'd been listening. My pond wasn't just historically significant. It was part of the Arkansas River Watershed Management System that protected federal installations downstream. Tampering with it without course approval was a federal crime that could land people in Leavenworth for 20 years. Sir, we'll have investigators on site within 48 hours. Major Hayes promised with the crisp efficiency of someone who took infrastructure protection seriously. Anyone who interferes with federal flood control systems will face the full weight of military justice. Meanwhile, Maria had orchestrated media coverage that would have made CNN jealous. She'd contacted environmental groups, veterans organizations, and water rights activists across the region. The story of a grieving veteran fighting corrupt officials to protect his wife's memorial and his community's safety was catnip for journalists hungry for David versus Goliath content. But my secret weapon was something Cordelia couldn't have anticipated in her wildest nightmares. I'd spent the previous month conducting precise hydrological calculations using my grandfather's original surveys and modern engineering software. Without my pond's retention capacity, the next major storm would overwhelm Pinid's drainage system like a tsunami hitting a sand castle. And according to the National Weather Service, that storm was arriving in exactly 72 hours. I appeared to surrender, even helping the pump truck operators access my property with the defeated resignation of someone who'd run out of legal options. Cordelia interpreted my cooperation as capitulation, announcing to anyone who'd listened that she'd finally eliminated the neighborhood's most dangerous water hoarder. What she didn't realize was that I was positioning myself for the most spectacular public education demonstration in Pinarage history. As the pumps drained 60 years of accumulated spring water, I documented every gallon with scientific precision. Flow rates, displacement calculations, and most importantly, real-time measurements of rising groundwater pressure in the surrounding areas. Basic physics was about to become Cordelia's worst nightmare. Sometimes you have to let people see consequences to understand cause and effect, I told Jake during our final strategy session. Cordelia wants to drain my pond. Fine, let's give her exactly what she's asking for and see how she likes the results. The weather forecast showed a massive Pacific storm system approaching Colorado with enough rainfall to test every drainage system in the state. Without my pond's retention capacity, Pinarage would discover why my grandfather had built flood control into the natural landscape. Mother Nature was about to deliver a physics lesson that would make headlines across the state and send certain corrupt officials straight to federal prison. The town hall meeting that would expose everything was scheduled for 7:00 p.m. on November 15th, exactly 3 hours before the national weather service predicted the storm of the decade would hit Pine Ridge. The timing wasn't coincidental. I'd been watching weather patterns with the obsessive precision of someone whose life depended on understanding when nature would demonstrate basic hydrology to people who'd ignored it. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as residents packed every available seat. TV cameras from 3 Denver stations lined the back wall, drawn by Maria's media blitz about water rights corruption in a Colorado mountain community. The smell of fear mixed with burnt coffee and the ozone scent of approaching storms Cordelia sat at the head table wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, radiating the smug confidence of someone who thought she'd already won. Behind her, Bradley fidgeted with papers while trying to look like a legitimate public servant, instead of the corrupt predator he actually was. I walked to the podium carrying a single manila folder and wearing the same calm expression I'd perfected during decades of military briefings. Outside, the first drops of rain began pattering against windows with the gentle insistence of an approaching reckoning. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for allowing me to present my final statement before I leave this community, I began, my voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd briefed generals and congressmen. I want to share what I've learned about water management, community leadership, and the consequences of ignoring basic engineering principles. I clicked the first slide of my presentation, a photograph of my empty pond basin, drained and scarred like an open wound in the mountain landscape. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people saw the destruction for the first time. 3 days ago, at the demand of your HOA leadership, I stopped hoarding the water that's been protecting this community from floods for 60 years. My voice remained steady as rain began drumming harder on the roof. Tonight, you're going to learn exactly what that means. The next slides showed the original 1960s Army Corps engineering surveys, federal floodplain maps, and my grandfather's hand-drawn water management diagrams that had prevented disasters for 6 decades. I explained how the natural retention system channeled spring runoff, prevented erosion, and maintained groundwater levels that kept basement dry throughout Pine Ridge. Here's what your HOA president didn't tell you when she demanded I drain my dangerous water hoarding facility. I continued, advancing to real-time flow measurements that made several people gasp. Without natural retention capacity, tonight's storm will overwhelm your drainage systems in approximately, I checked my watch as thunder rumbled overhead, 18 minutes. That's when I revealed the smoking gun evidence that would destroy their credibility forever. Security camera footage of Derek Blackstone dumping dead fish into my pond. Bank records showing payments from Mountain Vista Development to corrupt Inspector Willis McGrath. Bradley's own development plans showing how they intended to steal my water for their luxury condo complex. I've also filed these documents with the FBI's white-collar crime unit, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Colorado Attorney General's office, I announced as lightning illuminated the windows. Turns out interfering with federal flood control infrastructure while accepting bribes to falsify government reports carries serious federal prison time. Cordelia's face went white as fresh snow. She leaped to her feet, jabbing a manicured finger at me like a weapon. This is ridiculous. You can't prove any of these wild accusations. That's when the lights flickered and the first emergency sirens began wailing in the distance. Through the windows, we could see water beginning to back up in the community storm drains, exactly as I'd calculated. The rain was intensifying with the relentless precision of physics demonstrating why engineers matter. The beauty of hydrology, I said, raising my voice over the growing storm, is that water doesn't care about your HOA laws, your development permits, or your political connections. It follows the laws of gravity, and gravity always wins. Deputy Martinez burst through the doors, his radio crackling with emergency calls. We've got flooding throughout the lower neighborhoods. Storm drains are backing up. Basements are filling with water. And he stopped when he saw the crowd staring at him. That's when I delivered the mic drop line that would make local news history. I tried to tell you that my pond wasn't hoarding water from the community. It was protecting the community from water. But sometimes you have to let people experience consequences before they understand cause and effect. Through the windows, we watched Cordelia's precious white Tesla floating past the community center like an expensive bathtub toy carried by floodwater that was turning Piner's manicured streets into temporary rivers. The same woman who'd called my spring-fed pond a public health hazard was now watching her basement flood with contaminated storm runoff. FBI agents chose that moment to enter the building, their badges gleaming under emergency lighting as they approached Bradley with federal arrest warrants. The crimes had been federal all along: conspiracy, mail fraud, interference with federal infrastructure, and bribery of government officials. Justice arrived with the storm, and both were unstoppable forces of nature. The morning after the storm broke more than just weather records. It shattered the illusion that corruption could hide behind expensive suits and fake smiles. I stood on my porch, drinking coffee, and watching my neighbors work together with sandbags and water pumps, finally understanding what my grandfather's pond had been protecting them from all along. Within 48 hours, the FBI had arrested Cordelia and Bradley on federal conspiracy charges. Their development permits were fraudulent, their HOA violations were manufactured, and their bribery network reached into City Hall like cancer through healthy tissue. The local news couldn't get enough of the story. Corrupt officials brought down by a veteran engineer who'd let physics teach them a lesson they'd never forget. But the real victory came from watching Pine Ridge transform from a community divided by fear into neighbors united by purpose. Frank Henderson organized volunteer crews to help families pump water from flooded basement. Ruth started a meal train for displaced residents. Even old Pete Morrison came down from his ridge cabin to help sandbag the elementary school. "You know what the beautiful thing is, Tank?" Frank told me while we hauled muddy furniture from his basement. "We all learned something about water management that we should have known years ago. Your grandfather was protecting all of us, and we almost let those parasites destroy it." The restoration of my pond became a community project that brought together skills and stories from 3 generations of Pineriage residents. Dr. Morrison designed educational plaques explaining the natural water management system. Local kids volunteered to plant native vegetation around the restored retention areas. Even the new residents, the ones who'd supported Cordelia's regime out of ignorance rather than malice, rolled up their sleeves to help rebuild what they'd helped destroy. 6 months later, my pond was cleaner and more beautiful than ever, surrounded by walking trails and interpretive signs that turned my grandfather's engineering wisdom into a living classroom. The Pine Ridge Heritage Committee had grown into an official historical society with enough political influence to prevent future development scams. But the sweetest justice came from watching the legal consequences roll through the courts like boulders down a mountainside. Cordelia got 18 months in federal prison for conspiracy and fraud. Bradley received 3 years for bribery and interference with federal infrastructure. Willis McGrath, the corrupt inspector, lost his professional license and faced criminal charges that would keep him busy for years. Mountain Vista Development collapsed under federal investigation. Its assets seized to compensate victims across 3 states. The FBI discovered they'd stolen millions of dollars from families who'd trusted local government to protect them instead of preying on them. Meanwhile, our community established the Sarah Rodriguez Memorial Scholarship for environmental engineering students, funded by the settlement money we received from the corruption lawsuit. Every year, we'd help young people learn to protect natural resources and fight for communities that couldn't protect themselves. The annual Pineriage Spring Festival became our biggest celebration, drawing visitors from across Colorado to learn about water conservation, natural flood management, and community resilience. Local restaurants thrived, bed and breakfast booked solid, and our mountain community became known for environmental stewardship instead of corruption scandals. On quiet evenings, I'd sit by Sarah's pond, listening to water trickle over grandfather's hand-stacked stones, watching sunset paint the surface in colors that reminded me of her laugh. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to her about the day's events, knowing she'd be proud that we'd protected not just our family's legacy, but every family threatened by people who confused power with permission to steal. The best part, 3 other communities in Colorado contacted our Heritage Committee for help fighting similar development scams. Turns out corrupt officials hate publicity more than they love money, and our story had become a roadmap for ordinary people to defeat extraordinary greed. Rex and I would take evening walks around the restored pond, watching kids learn to fish in the same clear water where my grandfather had taught me patience and my wife had found peace. The sound of their laughter mixed with flowing water created the kind of harmony that can't be manufactured, only protected by people willing to fight for what matters. What's your worst HOA nightmare story? Drop it in the comments below, and let's compare battle scars from dealing with power-hungry neighbors who forgot they're supposed to serve the community, not rule it like feudal lords. And if this story inspired you to stand up against petty tyrants who think paperwork makes them kings, hit that subscribe button. I've got more tales of justice served cold with a side of sweet revenge. Sometimes the good guys really do win, especially when physics is on their side. Remember, knowledge is power, community is strength, and water always finds its own level. Together, we can stand up to anyone who tries to crush the little guy. From all of us here at HOA Stories, thanks so much for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors stand their ground and karma catch up, smash that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA drama we bring you.